You mean you still haven't visited the hospital? Even once? My doctor had asked my father. Well, no, but he's never gotten injured in his life. My dad replied with an honest yet sarcastic tone. Well, Mr. Aarons, you gotta take the kid to the hospital for a checkup. Who knows, maybe the kid's gotten some disease. You've got to make sure, just one visit. I know you can't afford it, but the kid's got to see somebody. I understand. My dad replied, seeming slightly concerned. I looked up at my father's face. He was looking down with a painful expression. He looked as if he'd just been scolded by my grandma. It's for the best. I understand your situation, but I mean, the kid hasn't seen a hospital in his life. My father nodded and stood up. Thank you, Doc. We'll be heading off now. The doctor seemed as if he wasn't done speaking to us, but my father still grabbed me by the wrist and dragged me out of the room with what seemed to be some aggressiveness. Why aren't we allowed to go to the hospital? I had asked my father. Reasons you'll understand later. The things at the hospital are not meant for your eyes. You will not be going to any hospital. No matter what, you'll be safe. Believe me, my dad yelled while dragging me across the parking lot. He went on to ramble on about how dangerous hospitals were. The usual. Every visit to the doctor, he would show up, the doctor telling him to take me to the hospital for some form of checkup, my father disagreeing, then leaving. To this day, I don't understand why he would still continuously take me there. It would be the same thing every trip, until I was about 10 years old. On my 10th birthday, he sat me down right after my birthday party and spoke to me. It seemed like he was speaking another language at the time, which I didn't understand. Random gibberish here and there. It was as if he expected me to understand everything he said, but I do remember some words he said. Though I didn't know what he spoke about, I knew it was about something horrid. He distinctly remembers these words, though there are some things you cannot see, my boy, things that you can't even comprehend. Promise me you won't go there ever, to which I had agreed. From then on, I wouldn't never visit the doctor again. Every time we drove past any hospital from that day on, I'd swear I'd see a woman with a bloodied face banging on the window, seemingly begging me to save her from something, though I ignored it. When I was 13, my dad left. My dad told me and my mother, I have business to finish. I'll be back in a month. Stay safe. To which he left with a big sigh. My mother dropped to the floor, tears welling down her face. From then on, nothing was the same. Every night, for 8 months, something would tap on my window. God, I wish I could unsee what I witnessed on that day. I woke up more annoyed than scared. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I didn't see anything tapping on my window, but rather from my mirror. I turned to my mirror to see my mother hovering above me, her neck sliced open, and her jaw hanging off her face. There was nothing above me when I looked up. I booked it to the light switch and screamed at the top of my lungs. My mother came rushing to my room. I could barely speak. After explaining to my mother what had happened, she handed me a note. The note was written on a grimy slip of sticky note. The note had a small splatter of blood on it. The note read, "If he sees it, take him there. It's for his own good." It was in my father's handwriting. My father was a good person. He cared about me a lot. I finally realized why we took those trips to the doctor. Why would we repeatedly go there? So it wouldn't see what I'd seen in the mirror. That same night, she drove me to the hospital, my first hospital visit. The moment we entered the hospital, the receptionist greeted us. "Good evening, ma'am. My name is Larson. What issue may you be experiencing this evening?" The man had a comforting voice. It was soft and deep, almost soothing, but that was just to fool us. My mother had whispered to the man something that I was not able to hear. I couldn't understand lips very well, but I believed she had muttered something along the lines of "his eyes are red." The man glared at me with angered eyes. The entire hospital went silent from then. "Room 24B, 3rd floor, Block C, hurry it up." His tone had completely changed. I could feel practically the whole floor staring at me. My mother grabbed my wrist in a hurry and ran to the elevator. About halfway to the elevator, somebody started to chase us, to which everybody on the floor followed. After what seemed like an eternity of running, we made it to the elevator. The door closed as the crowd caught up to us, and we were off to the 3rd floor. I glared up at my mother's face. She had an expression that I'd never seen before. She was slightly smiling on one side of her face, with her eyes closed. Her nose was scrunched up, and her mouth was slightly open. It seemed to be a mixture of disgust and joy. The elevator door opened slowly. We were greeted with what seemed to be an empty floor, aside from a nurse passing us every few seconds. We heard thumping behind us, like a bear was following us. My mother had urged me not to look behind us, no matter how tempting it was. Finally, we saw a large wall frame with a large sign stuck to the top of the doorway, which read, "Bloxy." The thumping stopped as we walked through the large doorway. "Don't look, it's a trick. Stay focused." After a few seconds of walking, we saw a panel beside a closed door that read Room 24B. We slowly entered the room. It was larger than I had expected. There was a small bed with a man lying in it, along with blood everywhere. Blood was smeared on the walls, and many syringes lay on a small medical trolley. My mother walked towards the bed, and I followed. The person lying in bed was none other than my father. His skull was cracked open. I couldn't stop looking at it. I was frozen. I felt like I was going to puke. My mother turned to me and watched my face fill with tears. It's okay. Please don't cry. They'll hear you. Okay, listen. There are things going on that I cannot explain." Before she could finish, my father's body started twitching. There were a few clicks and snaps. Then suddenly, he flipped over. His spine ripped out of his body and grew sharp spikes at each of his transverses. His spine suddenly elongated unnaturally. The bones in his body grew abnormally. His ribcage grew out of his chest. The bones in his arm broke through his palm and created a sharp blade through his hand. My mother started to scream and hid under a nearby hospital bed. I couldn't move. I watched his body contort into a grotesque, zombie-looking creature. His body was turning inside out. It was a gory mess. To this day, I still like to think that it was just a dream. Next thing I knew, armored guards burst through the door, firing away at what once was my father. I watched as he got onto all fours. He was unrecognizable at that point. His neck snapped, spilling blood everywhere. One by one, I watched as what once was my father destroy each of the guards. He decapitated each and every one of them with his deformed bones. I remember closing my eyes, wishing it would all stop. I opened them again. I was in the middle of a construction zone. It wasn't even night anymore. It seemed like it was the early afternoon. I could still feel the blood on my face. I could still hear my mother's horrified screams. It all happened so suddenly. A construction worker saw me there. I still couldn't move. I remember him driving me to the police station. I saw my mother and father there, worried and sick. As soon as they saw me, they ran up to me and hugged me. I managed to mutter a few words to my parents. "I'm never going to the hospital." My dad still embracing me. "The hospital?" I replied blankly, still trying to comprehend what I had just witnessed.